Welcome. I'm Dee Wolfsbane, and this is Story of the Game, a podcast where I take hours of real Dungeons & Dragons adventures and craft them into short narratives for your entertainment. Last time, we began our Disappearing Debacle story arc, which takes place in the magical realm of Elkamar, where two core rangers, by the names of Yenna and Yaman, ventured to Idriat to find adventurers to help them solve the mystery of their disappearing townsfolk. They found a strange group of 7 at the transformation tournament. They were awkward and kind, and after the tournament was complete, they agreed to help out the 2 core siblings. On the journey back to the core village of Skagakur, they were ambushed by Onkegs one night, but their woes were quickly forgotten the following evening as romance took to the air. Yenna seemed to click with Ferox, our white dragonborn druid, as they shared some awkward conversations and a beautiful song under the full moon. But Kumi, our white masked assassin, wasn't so lucky in love. He struck out with Yaman, even with some awesome wing-womaning from Carrick, our aimlessly wandering detective. But, with the evening over and dawn now breaking, Yenna and Ferox are now set to tell the group of the strange cave they found at their backs. What secrets does it hold? Will it help them on their journey? Let's find out as we delve into another episode of Story of the Game. Let me tell you a story of love and loss. The lost city of Tea, a satyr, and a blood hunter. Survived against this huge kraken. Mykolas, the trickster. Of wild magic. Of a plague that swept through. Dragons, I say. The orb of tides. Of a hopeless guild. There was this bard. And this is what happened. Morning broke to the song of birds as the party slowly came to. On the windy ledge, partway up Reykir mountain, the rock began to heat from the strengthening sun, which glistened and danced off the lake and trees far below. Ferox told the group about the previously unknown cave that she'd discovered the night before, hidden right behind them in the sheer rock face. The party agreed they should check it out. Our cousin dragonborn druids, White Ferox and Black Grim, transformed into squirrels and raced their way up the rock face. They entered the hole that was 20 feet above the rocky ledge, which led to the cave. Clotho summoned her eagle familiar, Zeus, to accompany the druids inside. The arcane bird poofed into existence and soared up to the opening, following the squirrels. The morning sun cast a small ray of light into the cavern, just enough so that Ferox and Grim could see inside it. They stopped at the edge of the tunnel, and a good thing too, because there was a sheer 20-foot drop back down to the rocky ground. Squirrel Ferox expertly hopped her way from rock to rock to get to the ground once more, while Squirrel Grim hopped upwards, towards the raven nests that were built in the upper sections of the jagged walls. Squirrel Grim rummaged around the nests as squirrels were wont to do, hoping to find anything of use or value. Ravens did like shiny things, right? Some of the nests were currently unoccupied, though that didn't mean they were going to stay that way. While Grim searched above, Squirrel Ferox transformed back into her dragonborn self to search below. Lighting a torch for better vision, Ferox saw that she was standing in a 30-foot tall and wide cavern. Spiderwebs coated the walls and floor and were littered with debris from the raven nests above. Everything from twigs to excrement and even a few coins were tangled in their webs. Clotho's familiar Zeus came and landed on Ferox's shoulder to watch as Clotho relayed what Zeus was seeing back to the group. And now, we're going to step outside the game a moment for a spell spotlight, presenting Find Familiar, a first level conjuration spell. Now, Find Familiar is a bit of a hefty spell, so sit back, grab some tea, and welcome to the wonders of being a wizard. Ta-da! With spells that are pages long. Find Familiar is a spell that allows you to create a spirit that takes animal form. Initially, it takes an hour to cast and consumes 10 gold pieces worth of charcoal, incense, and herbs that are burned in a brass brazier. After the initial casting, the wizard can continuously poof the familiar into and out of existence. When out of existence, the familiar is snuggling cozily in a pocket dimension, waiting to be called upon again. When in existence, it can act on its own and do just about anything that its animal form could do, except attack. Though you can cast a spell that requires you to touch the target through your familiar. It's a great delivery system. Though, if your familiar gets damaged and loses all its hit points, which is like 2 most of the time, you're back to square one. As your familiar just disappears out of existence. And this time, it doesn't go back to some cozy pocket dimension, but is gone. So, this means you have to recast the entire 1-hour spell with the components to get your familiar back. Also, when the familiar is within 100 feet of the caster, they can telepathically communicate with one another.
Do it. Press it.
The cool part, though, is that the caster can also decide to see and hear through their familiar's form.
Yeah.
Though doing so means they go deaf and blind themselves.
Oh no!
This can be a bit dangerous, but at least you can still feel.
Phew.
Which is great for when, a giant bird called a rock clamps its massive claws around you and sinks their talons through your skin before your body gets flown away.
Oh, crap.
And at that point, I'm not sure if you'd actually want to regain your sight and hearing in your actual body. Anyway, that obviously normally doesn't happen. Normally, you're with your group, and they protect you during this time.
Please.
Or pat you on the shoulder to make you aware that you probably want to come back now.
Oh, shit.
Anyway, if you're safe about it, you can pretty much go into and out of your familiar senses at will.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the spell, Find Familiar, is only available for wizards. Though, there are some cases where bards or warlocks can get access to such a spell.
Ta-da!
In the case of this group, though, it's our elven wizard Clotho who has the spell.
Yeah, she does.
And she makes quite good use of her familiar, which she calls Zeus.
Woo.
Now, she always has the option to recast the spell, the hour-long component parts, all that stuff, to allow Zeus to take another form. But birds are awesome because they can fly.
Yeah.
You get a lot of use out of the spell this way. Overall, great spell. One of my favorites, if truth be told. Though, I must confess, it might be because I like the idea of a pet that I can recast whenever it dies.
Together forever.
With Clotho looking through her familiar's eyes and listening through its ears, she watched as Dragonborn Ferox methodically moved around the walls of the chamber. Ferox found what appeared to be a door on the far side. It was covered with spiderwebs that had accumulated over years and years of being undisturbed. Wiping the webs away, she saw the smooth stone door. Etched in the rock of the door was a symbol. It looked like a labyrinth. It took a second, but a torch went off in Ferox's head. She had seen this before. It was the same design as one of Yenna's tattoos. Ferox searched the stony door for a lock or a handle or some other way to open it, but she couldn't find anything. At that moment, loud squeaks of content echoed from the ravens' nests above, quickly followed by angry caws from ravens and a flutter of wings. Squirrel Grim bolted out of a nest with something clasped in his mouth, as a raven angrily shouted him away. Seeing nothing else inside the cavern, Ferox returned to squirrel form and followed Grim and Zeus out of the cave. As the druids regained their dragonborn forms back in the morning light, Clotho returned to her own senses and sent Zeus back into his own pocket dimension. Ferox asked Yenna what the labyrinth tattoo meant. Both Yenna and Yaman had the same white tattoo in the same place on their left shoulder. Yenna explained that it was the symbol of their core tribe, the Vehsen tribe. Everyone in their tribe received the tattoo when they came of age. The party then asked what the two Vehsen knew about the door they'd found in the cavern, but the siblings had never heard of such a door, and didn't know what it meant or why it had their tribe's symbol on it. The party decided to file this information away and think about it at a later time, since they really didn't have any actionable theories right now. Grim then showed the group what he'd retrieved from the raven's nest. It was a golden iridescent putty. Clotho took it, and using her books, cast a spell to determine if the putty was magical. The putty lit up with arcane energies, but unexpectedly, so too did the sheer rock face behind them. The wizard quickly cast a second spell to identify the specific magic within the putty. She learned that Grim had found arcane putty, which could be used to replace any spell components worth 200 gold pieces or less, though the spell would consume it when it was used. Excitement buzzed through the group at the possibilities and the reasons why the dungeon master, me, might have left such an item. The group was convinced that I was being crafty and that they would need it at some point. Now, just between you and me, that wasn't the reason. They didn't actually need it for anything in particular. No, it was there because it had accidentally been dropped off a cliff by a core mage one day when their component pouch had ripped open while climbing. The arcane putty looks golden and glinted in the sun, and, well, ravens like shiny things. The raven collected the arcane putty to impress its mate, and it's been in the nest ever since. Also, I kind of wanted to give the group a cool little magic item. Nothing big, just something. Spoiler warning, they never end up actually using the arcane putty. Sad days. Pocketing the putty, Clotho immediately cast another identify spell to determine what magic she detected on the rock face. Her spell told her that part of the rock face was actually a door. This door was held closed by an arcane lock. This meant that if they could suppress this arcane lock, then the entire party would be able to enter the cavern. All they needed was a spell called Knock. But Clotho knew that the second door, the one Ferox had found inside the cavern, would require something different altogether. Clotho knew this because she'd been able to investigate the runes on the inside cavern door through Zeus's eyes, and had been able to determine that it was held closed by some other type of magic. In any case, no one in the group had access to the Knock spell, so they couldn't even get into the cavern to begin with. Thus, they followed this information under something else they also had to consider once in town. Yenna informed the group that there was a library in the monastery of Skagakur. Perhaps they could find the spells they needed there. With that in mind, the party continued their ascent up Reykir Mountain, along the seemingly never-ending switchbacks. If you've ever gone up switchbacks, you know the pain. And now that they were 3/4 of the way up the mountain, the air had thinned, and it was much more difficult to ascend. But finally, as they circled around the mountain, they got their first glimpse at Skagakur. Skagakur wasn't just a mountain village. It also consisted of floating islands which littered the space beside the cliff face, as if large chunks of the mountain had broken off and an invisible force had trapped them in place. These islands hung in the air, suspended aloft, lulling slightly, like dancing lights around a mage. A waterfall even fell from the mountain to land on one of these islands before weaving through it and falling off, cascading down the mountain to the lake hundreds of feet below at its base, the same one that the party had fought onkegs at 2 days prior. The islands, like the mountainside, boasted greenery, though much of the cliff facing the islands was too steep for dirt to accumulate and roots to take hold. Instead, it maintained a very respectable shrubbery and was pitted with dwellings that the core had built into its rocky exterior. The same rock was unnaturally carved, with switchbacks, entry alcoves, and windows that had fogged glass. The switchbacks themselves all came towards one spot at the very peak of the mountain village. Here was a wide opening, like the mountain had a gaping maw to devour a gargantuan beast. The wide opening was surrounded by elaborate carvings, and a few Corps were in it standing watch. The rest of the Corps walked along the switchbacks on the mountain face, though many expertly scaled the near vertical slope without issue. A few were currently traversing the rope bridges that connected the mountain and all the islands together. The floating islands, too, had windows and doors along the exterior, many with ladders that stretched down from the flat tops. But the islands had things that the rock face did not. They had trees and full lush forests, and buildings built atop their surfaces. Some of these buildings were small, others were large, but they all seemed to be built of wood or stone, and many were hidden within the forest depths. Larger temples of sorts could be seen on the farthest of the islands, peeking up above the forests themselves. As the group approached Skagakur along the carved-out path along the cliffside, they could start to feel the tension from the village's inhabitants. Though the Corps moved freely, they were constantly peering over their shoulder as if checking they weren't being followed. Even the rope bridges holding the islands together were strained and slanted precariously downward from the mountain face. The islands seemed to have sunk from their initial placements, as if they were starting to fall from the sky. Seeing the full scale of what she was returning to, Yenna whispered to herself, "It's gotten worse." Yenna and Yemen led the group along the carved walkways along the mountain, to the rope bridges that steeply descended to the first of the 5 main islands. They passed some villagers along their way, who greeted the siblings' return in the silent gesturing language of the Corps, while casting curious and somewhat suspicious glances at the motley crew they'd brought with them. The party continued to the second, and then the third of the main islands, which was the lushest and most forested of the 5. They followed the siblings along the well-kept paths and then down into the island's interior, into a rocky passageway within its depths. The passageway had doors every so often, as if the entire island was one big apartment. They followed the siblings along the curved corridor that seemed like it would encircle the entire island itself, until they came to a door with a wreath on it. The wreath seemed to be made by a child, judging by the fact that it wasn't that neat of a wreath. A lot of the sticks and other branches seemed to be poking out at awkward angles, but had definitely been constructed with love and care. Yen and Yemen opened the door to the warmth of a family home. The hearth opposite had a fire burning invitingly from across the sitting area. The sitting area was composed of a rug and a low circular table with cushions on the floor all around it. Off to one side of the room was a counter area where dishes were being done by 2 older-looking Corps. One window pierced the wall beside the hearth to view the valley below, and 3 doors around the space appeared to lead to bedrooms off the main living area. From her seated place on the rug, a young Corps with hair flowing out behind her rushed over and launched herself at Yenna and Yemen, grabbing them both around the hips as she cried out with joy, "Uncle Yemen! Auntie Yenna! You're back! You're back! You're back!" She then stepped back and started asking question after question after question in a non-stop display of childhood curiosity. Smiling, Yenna knelt down and answered her niece's infinite questions. Nithni, her niece, lit up like the sun and then started directing more of her questions to the group. "Why do you have pointy ears? You guys have tails? That's so cool. Do you breathe fire? I heard there's a dragon that breathes fire around here. Are you hiding your face with a mask because you don't want people to look at you?" Her questions continued and continued and continued. This immediately endeared the young child to the players at my table, and they made the decision there and then that they wouldn't let anything happen to this wonderful kid. As their characters responded and spoke with little Nithni, Yenna and Yemen exchanged greetings with their parents and explained what had happened on their journey to Idriat. They themselves learned that there had been a commotion at the monastery just the day before. But the parents didn't know much besides that it was the talk of the village. They also informed Yen and Yamin that the rest of the Vehsen tribe had picked up and left Skagakur. They felt it was too dangerous to stay within the village at this time, and would only return when they felt that everything was right again. And then it was time for the group to look around town, and Nithni, in her infinite knowledge of the inner workings of her village, as all 8-year-olds have, offered to be their tour guide. The group happily accepted, and Yen and Yamin led them around town as Nithni narrated the entire way. Nithni showed them all the coolest spots. First, she took them to the town square, as it were, though it was more irregularly shaped than an actual square. Wooden benches were around the edges and between wonderfully carved statues. Some of the benches were occupied, some weren't, as other Kor also walked about the square, going about their daily business and chatting with friends. In the center of the square was a pedestal with a stone basin like a bird bath, but the basin didn't hold water. Instead, it held a burning flame in its depths, though the flame right now was flickering and sputtering unhappily. Nithni led the group up to it, explaining how it was a special living fire and gave light to everything everywhere. As Nithni skipped off to take them to her secret hideout, Yenna explained to the group that the flame in the basin was the eternal fire, and had been lit at the town's creation by the 3 founding tribe leaders. As she said this, she pointed to 3 of the statues with prominent places within the square. As they followed Nithni back into the forest, Yenna finished by saying that the flame was dimmer than when she had seen it last. It was dimmer than she had ever seen it. Nithni took them past the hut, which was the home to the Oracle of Skrepa, whom, according to Nithni, was an all-seeing, all-knowing Kor who could even tell you when you were going to die. She then led them off the path to her most favoritist, secretest of places, and they couldn't tell anyone about it. Once they promised they wouldn't breathe a word to anyone, Nithni showed them to a little lean-to she'd made, where a fallen tree met one that was still in its prime. She crawled inside, proud of the not-so-secret hideout that she'd created. Though they didn't fit into the young Kor's nook, Kumi, Ferox, Carrick, and Lucifer all knelt down to indulge the youth. After some coaxing from Yenna, they left the hideout and crossed to the other floating islands, from one filled with shops and standalone huts to another with temples to Melora and places for the tribe's leaders to assemble. From there, they went back to the main mountain and the steep switchbacks. Here they were directed to 3 different places, all of which were carved into the mountain. The first was an underground spring called the Spring of Melora's Blessing. The second was Mebo's Tavern and Inn called the Silver Scythe. And the last one was a large monastery called Skagakur, whose entrance could be found in the mountain's gaping maw that overlooked the entire town. At that point, it was time for Nithni to go back home, but she stomped and whined in protest that she wasn't tired and wanted to stay with her new friends. Yamin took her home anyway, half dragging the little Kor behind him. The party decided they would split up between Melora's Spring and Mebo's Tavern, and that they would meet up afterwards in the tavern for some grub. And so, Yenna took Grim, Ferox, Kumi, and Lucifer to the Life Spring, while our spellcasters, Oriana, Carrick, and Clotho, went to the Silver Scythe. The underground spring looked like it was out of a fairy tale. It was a large, cavernous space, with steam rising from the hot spring below. An opening in the cliffside above would have allowed morning light to bathe the water that was kept warm with Melora's blessing. Layers of prickly rock encased the warmth of the spring, trapping in the heat and Melora's wonderful energies. The Kor in the bath watched as Yenna took the Dragonborns, elf and half-elf, through the ritual of changing into simple white robes and dunking their heads to purify themselves, before finally relaxing into the pool. Once in the pool, this gave Ferox some more time to get to know Yenna, as Grim blew bubbles in the pool, with Cumi and Lucifer not far away. Meanwhile, Oriana, Clotho, and Carrick made it to the silver scythe, marked by the intricate carvings around the entrance that depicted cores holding up drinks and toasting. On the door itself was a painting of 2 silver scythes crisscrossed. It was the most popular tavern in town, and as such, it was loud, although not rambunctiously so. Core were seated at tables, many unwinding with friends after a hard day's work, while others preferred to keep to themselves. Bright, beautiful artwork was displayed around the walls of the room, art of Reykir Mountain, Skagakur, and the Eternal Flame, as well as images of Core doing various tasks, from scaling the mountain to building the town square. There was even a portrait of 3 Core. The center Core in the image was a fierce-looking Core with tattoos all over, including his face. They had never seen a Core with face tattoos before, and knew that he must have done some spectacular deeds to earn them. From behind the bar was the most ostentatiously dressed Core they'd seen. Most of the Core kept to simple leathers and open-shouldered shirts and bare fingers, all of which were practical for climbing purposes. But this one wore many dangling bracelets and even a few rings. He also had a singular earring with a pearl dangling from the bottom. Dark feathers were woven into his white hair that was pulled back off his face, and as he leaned over the counter, they could see he wore a belt with many pouches. He noticed the new group as they entered, though he was currently engaged in conversation with another Core. As the group approached the ostentatiously dressed Core, they heard him finish reading off a scroll to the patron, deciphering some strange language in the text. "I hope that serves you well, Guild. You must excuse me now. It appears we have some lovely new guests in town." He opened his arms wide as he addressed Oriana, Clotho, and Carrick. "Welcome, weary travelers. What brings such fine and fascinating people to my humble abode?" Listeners, meet Mebo Tolva. The 3 spellcasters asked Mebo their questions, our illustrious Carrick going into detective mode once again. The first thing they wanted to know about was the cave they'd found around the mountain on their way here. Mebo didn't know about the cave specifically, but he had read legends of a mysterious cave that Ulagon Vehsen had created. Ulagon Vehsen, along with Dabhar Vitsini and S1E2 Tolva, were the 3 founders of Skagakur. The 3 prominent statues in the town square were depictions of them, same with the portrait of the 3 Core that was on his wall. Oriana asked about the one with the face tattoos, and learned that it was Ulagon Vehsen. Yenna and Yaman were part of the Vehsen tribe, and were likely descendants of his. Mebo explained that to create Skagakur, the 3 founders, Ulagon, Dabhar, and S1E2, had come together where the mountain floated to build a safe haven for all Core tribes. They were the leaders at the time of their respective tribes, and created the social constructs that still existed in Skagakur today. Mebo explained that it was possible that Ulagon had created a cave, and perhaps even the passages that ran through the mountain, or maybe he just found them. Whatever the case, the knowledge was either lost or never disseminated, if such passages did indeed exist. Being part of the Tolva tribe, Mebo didn't know anything. The founder, S1E2 Tolva, hadn't passed down such knowledge through his tribe. If anyone would know, it would likely be the Vehsens. But alas, Yenna and Yaman had never heard of it, and so the knowledge had probably died long ago. There was one other possibility, according to Mebo. In the library of the Skagakur monastery were alcoves, one that belonged to each of the Core tribes. If the knowledge hadn't been passed down orally to its descendants, there was still a chance, however slim, that the knowledge might be in a book in the Vehsen alcove. This idea intrigued Oriana, Clotho, and Carrick, and they turned their questions to the Skagakur monastery. They had already heard from Nithni's grandparents that the monastery had been attacked the other day, and they'd also already wanted to check out the library and speak with Sago. Sago and Mebo had been the two individuals at the top of their to-talk-to list, as it were. "Sago, didn't you hear? When the monastery was attacked yesterday, Sago went missing. No one knows if he's dead or alive." They pressed for details, but Mebo only knew that there'd been an attack in the library of the monastery. Sago had tried to fend off the attackers, and did a damn good job based on the corpses that remained. But in the end, the attackers were gone, and Sago had gone missing. Oriana, Clotho, and Carrick desperately wanted to go to the monastery now, but the sun had set, and they thought it was better etiquette to wait till morning. This was when the others who had gone to the spring joined the three spellcasters. They sat around a table, retelling what they had learned and of their relaxation times within the spring. The entire party was treated to Mebo's hospitality since they were helping the town with the crisis. The group decided that they'd start early the next day. They'd split up into two groups. One would go straight to the monastery, while the other would go to the Oracle of Skrepa. Being a divination wizard herself, Clotho's interest had been piqued by hearing that there was an oracle in town, and she wanted to know if the oracle could help direct them further. In the end, the lines were drawn. Yenna would lead the girls to the oracle and then meet up with the boys in the monastery afterwards. Yenna offered the party a place to sleep in her family's home. Not wanting to impose themselves on the small dwelling, the majority of the party decided to take up rooms in the Silver Scythe instead. Ferox, though, accepted the kind offer and went to sleep on the Vehsen's family couch. More like cushions on the floor, but you get the idea. With a new dawn would come new discoveries, but what would they be? What secrets would the monastery hold? Would the oracle be able to help them? Find out next episode when things start to pick up and clues start to fall into place during the third episode of the Disappearing Debacle Arc. We're going to end today's episode with a small segment I'd like to call Memorable Moments. Everyone who plays RPGs, meaning role-playing games, has moments in their games that they'll never forget. Today, I'm going to tell you about one of mine. This moment goes back to the very first game of D&D I ever played. My character was an elven wizard by the name of Valenthe. The other players at the table called her a magpie, but I wouldn't actually call her a magpie. She was just really interested in arcane artifacts and wanted to know more about them. Well, long story short with the entire game, they ended up on a pirate ship and ended up on this island. The island was covered in coins and gold in this huge mound, and at the very top of the mound was this pedestal, on top of which rested the Orb of Tides. From the shore, they hiked up this little mound of gold, and Valenthe, being Valenthe, ended up picking up the orb. When she touched the Orb of Tides, the entire island began to quake, and this great sea monster came out of the ocean behind them. Valenthe dropped the Orb of Tides, and it got lost within the gold piles beneath them. The rest of her party turned to fight the sea monster, but, well, Valenthe is Valenthe, and she was more interested in the arcane object than the monster currently attacking them. And she ended up delving into the gold pile, searching for this Orb of Tides. The rest of her party kept yelling at her to help within the fight, because, well, they weren't doing great. But she was like, just one moment, she just really wanted to find this orb. So she delved into this pile of gold, searching and searching. I think it was like 3 or 4 rounds of just searching for this Orb of Tides. Maybe more. As her entire party slowly died around her. Well, they weren't dying. They were definitely losing a ton of health, though. She eventually did find it, though, with some amazing rolls, and ended up picking up this Orb of Tides. And when she did, she realized that she could actually use it to call up the ocean and basically swept the monster away. Well, she swept it away enough so that they could get back to their ship and then used it to kind of keep the sea creature away as they sailed away for their lives. In the end, it was successful, and, well, she didn't get them killed that time. Well, no, she never actually ever got them killed, but it was close a few times. She definitely walked into a trap a time or two. And so, that was my first introduction to the game of Dungeons & Dragons, and I've fallen in love with it even more since. And though I've had many moments over the years that I've adored, this was one of the first ones, and so I would say it is definitely my most memorable moment. If you have a memorable moment that you would like to get onto the podcast, go to dwolfsbane.com and sign up for email notifications. Be sure to have Story of the Game, a D&D podcast checked off, and wait for the email asking for your memorable moment. Also remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications on your chosen platform so that you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening, and come join me next time to continue the Disappearing Debacle Arc of Story of the Game. Oh, I already did that. Oh, no. No. Yeah. Once again, into the breach.